the one, the only, Ben Sion.
Good morning and welcome to Yeshiva YouTube Just Daf It. Today we're doing It Sotah Daf Mem Dalet number 44. A great share for you today. We continue talking about Milchama, war. There's a war going on in Israel now. It's interesting that talk about it now. It Sotah. I once heard from the rabbi, modern Orthodox shul in West Hempstead. My parents, that was just there for Pesach, he said that it's interesting. A lot of times, Daf Yomi talks about things that are relevant at that time. And he said Rameir Shapiro, when he founded Daf Yomi, he did it on purpose. I don't know if he did it on purpose. There's a lot of Masechtas that we learned that have nothing to do with the time period that we're in. But sometimes it works out. Did Hashem plan it? Did Rameir Shapiro plan it like that? I'm not entirely sure. Let's start from the bottom of Mem Gimel and Beis. The last words. Amr Rabbi Yitzchak Amr Yochanan Mishum Elazar ben Yaakov. Mace, top of Mem Dalet and Aleph. Mace Tofes Arba Amos Latuma. A dead person, wherever he is, even if you don't pass over him directly, right? You become Tamim Midrabanan. They were Gozer Tuma Drabanan in the surrounding 4 Amos where the dead person is or where he's buried. The reason being because you might unwittingly put your hand or a part of your body over it where the mace is. And the mace, the tuma rises, we learn. The Tana Tuna, Bryce supports this. Chatzer hakever ha'omid b'toha tohar. Let's say you have a grave, but you have a courtyard built around it. A lot of times they have fancy graves which have, a monument built there. They have a nice, courtyard. Meron, there's a place to go inside. So if you're inside the courtyard, even though you're within Arba Amos, you're Torah. They weren't gozer in that case because it's discernible, it's recognizable, the grave from the courtyard. Who shiyu ba Arba Amos? Which says the courtyard has to be at least 4 amos big. Mesil omrim Arba Tfachim. Mesil says even it's only 4 Tfachim. Medar Amurim shepiskam el Ma'ala. Where do we say 4 Tfachim? Where's the Machlokes Beit Shammai Yitzhak? Where the only way to get into the courtyard is to lower yourself down from on top. Well, piskam in asad, but if you get into the courtyard from the side, which is the normal way of getting it, Devrei kol arba amos. Everyone says the courtyard has to be at least, even Mesil agrees it has to be at least 4 amos. Otherwise, you might unwittingly be mahil, right? Become an oel, a tent on top of the mace. Klape laya, the Gemara says. In which direction? Doesn't make sense. The opposite. Adarav, I mean asad, midrid v'nafik milmala yefshad lo mahil. Right? If the opening is from the side, so it's recognizable, the courtyard is distinct from the grave itself. So you're basically, it's easy to get out. So you're probably going to be careful and not put one of your limbs on top of where the dead person is. However, Piskam al Mala, where it's hard to get into there, you have to climb down a ladder to get into the courtyard. Elamedar Amurim. So the Gemara fixes it up. Where's the Machlokes Beit Shammai Yitzhak? Piskam in Asad. And that's where Beis Hillel says 4 Tfachim courtyard is good enough. Piskam al Mala Arba Amos. Everyone agrees if the only way to get down into the courtyard is to lower yourself down on the ladder. Everyone agrees you need a courtyard. Even Beis Hillel agrees you need a courtyard of 4 Amos, unless otherwise the mace is Tofes Arba Amos, and even within Arba Amos you become Tamim Rabbanan. This is only talking about a courtyard where it's recognizable. It's a courtyard. It has fences around it. The reason a courtyard is different is because it has a fence around it. So you recognize it as a courtyard. You see from this price though that if it was just a regular grave or a person's buried in the ground and there's nothing significant around him, then Dalet Amos, you would become tummy, even though you're not directly over the mace, you're within 4 amos, you become tummy. Continue from the Mishnah. Tarabanan, Asher Eras, Echad Ma'aris is a psula, Echad Ma'aris is a almana. Whether you get engaged to a virgin, or you get engaged to a woman who's been married already. Echad Shomer is Yavam, whether you're waiting to do Yibam. Even 5 brothers go to war. One of them is married and he doesn't have children. He dies in the war. He leaves 4 brothers. Now they become she's a shomeres yavam for all 4 of them. Kulan choshen. They all go back from the middle of the war. They leave. This is talking about the exemption the partial exemption where they're just engaged, right? You go back, but you have to supply food and water and fix the roads to help the effort of the army. Lo lakach v'lo lakach. The pasuk says lo lakcha. Could have just said lo lakach. Why the extra hey? To exclude a case where a Kohen Gadol gets engaged to an almana, or a grusha gets a chalusa gets engaged to a Kohen. Mamzeres is like Israel, or a mamzer or mamzeres gets married to Israelis. Say this brisa, this opinion is not Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Amar Hayari Barach Levav Zemes Yarim Avera Shabiyado. We're going to learn in the Mishnah on this daf, later on in this daf, that there's an exemption for people that are very afraid to battle in war. And he says that's not talking about people who are actually afraid of the war. People that are afraid they're going to die in the war because of their sins. Even if they're afraid of their sins, they go back. So, of course, somebody who is engaged to someone who's usher to them, you're engaged to a mamzeres, or a Kohen's engaged to a grusha, or a Kohen Gadol almana, for sure those people are excluded. So you don't need lo lakcha, the extra hay, to exclude them. Where does this know? It could even be Rabbi Yossi Aglili this brisa. Like Rabba said, Rabba says there's no actual isser to get engaged. An almana to a Kohen Gadol, a grusha to a Kohen Hedjah. There's no isser to get engaged. The only isser is to cohabitate with them, which is to marry them. Why? What is Rabba's reasoning based on? Matam lo yikach mishum lo yichal. It says consecutively in the pasuk when you shouldn't marry an almana, shouldn't marry Kohen Gadol, a grusha, or a Kohen Hedjah. It says lo yikach and it says lo yichalel, right? Mishum haki en aloke ashi yivol, right? Lo yikach is really get engaged, but it says lo yichal. The reason you can't get engaged or can't marry, it could be marry or engaged. The reason is because chilul. When you have chilul, lo yichal, you profane your seed, your progeny is profaned. If a Kohen marries a grusha and they have a child, the child is a chalal. So only when you have the possibility of having a chalal when you get married, and now it's mutter to cohabitate. So that's the problem. Otherwise, it's not usher, and that's why it has to exclude them. Tana Rabbana. Asher Bona, Asher Nata, Asher Eras. The pasuk says that he built, that he planted, Asher Eras. Right? In that order. Right? Those are the exclusions. The people get to leave the battlefield. Lim the Torah Darach. Torah taught you something by saying in this order. Sheivna Adam Bayis Vita Kerem Achir Gisa Isha. A person should first build a house. And then plant a vineyard, make a parnasa, earn a living, develop his business. And only after you have a house to live in, you bought a house, and you have a business running, then you should marry a woman. Much like today, where people get engaged and they're pushing in Mishpacha magazine to get engaged at the age of 21 to help solve the shidduch crisis and be supported for your parents and in-laws for 10 years. Without a house, without a business, never even planning to have a business. The Gemara teaches you that's not the way. I don't know why people ignore these Gemaras that are so against our dominant lifestyle in the yeshivish world. Even Shlomo said in his wisdom, he said in Mishlei, what does that mean? Prepare outside your work. It refers to building a house or buying a house. That's developing your business, planting a vineyard. Then you build your house. That's a reference to your wife, marrying someone. That's why I always say that the correct age to get married is not before 28. Or else you're not mature enough, right? I would say 35 is probably the best. I got married at 35. A different explanation. Shlomo Melech meant Zem Mikra. Right? First you start learning Chumash with Rashi, Mishnah, Asta, Mishnah. Sorry, 1 second. Zem Mikra. Asta B'Shalach, Zem Mishnah. Then after you finish learning Mikra, then you learn Mishnah. Or the halachos that are pertinent to Mishnah Brula, and say, and then only then can you learn Gemara. Another explanation. Mikra. Well, Mishnah is learning Mikra and Mishnah. And then you learn Gemara. Only you can only engage in positive acts for your community after you've learned Gemara and learned Mikra Mishnah. First you learn. I don't think he's arguing on the previous opinions. He's just saying there's more to life than just Mikra, Mishnah, Gemara, and then learning. First you learn Mikra, then Mishnah, then Gemara. And then you do positive actions to help out your community. Only after you've done all those things, then you can do what I'm doing. Drosh v'kabel schar is to go and give shiurim and learn be'ian. Right? I give drashas, apapulim, a lot of chidushim over here. I get schar for it also, but only after you've done all those other things. Then, and obviously you see Gemara is not be'ian. Gemara is not talking about be'ian. Like the Gemara says in Shabbos, the Gemara says that one Amorah said, first you're supposed to learn all the Talmud, Daf Yomi. And then and then you're supposed to go into deeper analytical understanding of the Torah. Because the problem is you can't really start giving Ian Shiurim unless you know most of the Torah. I didn't really start giving Ian Shiurim. I've learned most of them, an overwhelming majority of Shas. I'm familiar with a lot of the concepts. Then you can start giving the Ian Shiurim. But if you're only familiar with a couple of Masechtas, there's no way you can give an Ian Shiur because you're not familiar with the rest of the Torah. These people don't return from the Milchama. It says you build a merpeses, you build a security guard gate in front of your house, you build a porch. Those things are not considered building a house. Also, one of the things, if you knock your house down, you rebuild it. Bryce says, Tana, if you made it a little bigger, you even added one row of bricks, that's considered a new house, and you go back. Even though he builds a brick house in Sharon, Sharon is on the coast, the Mediterranean coast, he would not go back. Tana, the Bryce says, every 7 years, twice every 7 years, you renovate it. Now, in the article, they said the reason, I believe maybe they quoted Rashi, is because it's very bad land over there and the house falls apart, so you have to build it twice every 7 years, so therefore it's not a permanent house. I don't believe that's the reason. It says Levanim, a brick house. The strongest you can build is a brick house. I think it's just called a vacation house. Vacation house is you constantly refurbishing and renovating because you're a vacation house. You want to have more luxuries. So therefore it's never considered in a permanent state. It's always being remodeled and refurbished, so therefore it's not considered building a new house. And another reason also not considered is because you have a different house, right? I believe for a vacation house you wouldn't, right? If you have one house and you build a second house in Monte Carlo, so I don't think you would. I don't think you would do another one. You would exempt from the war because it's your permanent house. I think that's part of what it's saying. Instead, you renovate it. It's a vacation house, which you renovate every 7 years, which means it's your second house, which means that you're not exempt. The following people don't leave. Sorry, they don't have to go to the battlefront at all. So the other people go to the battlefront and they leave and they help out the war effort from behind. Some people, but if you get married already and you're in the first year of marriage, or you build a house and you start living in it, or you planted a vineyard and start using the vineyard. Isha chadasha, isha chadasha. A new wife. Almana grusha minayin. How do you know if you get married to a woman who's an almana, a widow, a grusha, divorcee, minayin? Talmud lomer isha mikol makom. Right? He says isha chadasha. I could have just said chadasha. Why is it isha? Any woman. MK and Talmud lomer matam lomer isha chadasha. Why is it the word chadasha? Say isha. Misha chitshalo. It has to be someone who's new for him. Yatsa machzek grushasa she'en chitshalo. To exclude someone who gets married and then gets divorced, and then remarries the same woman, that is not considered a simcha that he goes back for. He doesn't have to go to war for it. You should not go out to war, to the army. You might think these people, they're in their first year of marriage, first year of their house, they should be like the other people who got engaged and go to the back of the army and give them water and food and fix the road. That's why he adds in nothing. He shouldn't partake in the war at all. Maybe also those cases where you're engaged or you built a house, you didn't use it yet. Alav. It says it's exclusionary. Alav yatamavir. Aval atamavir ala cherim. Other people, for example, people who are in a partial state of simcha, they're engaged but they're not yet married, etc. Once it says lo yavar, nothing, he doesn't do anything. Why does it have to add? He doesn't go to the army. If he doesn't do anything, he doesn't even supply them with water and food. He doesn't fix the roads. Of course, he doesn't go to fight in the war. To tell you that there's two law, and if you go fight in the army, you violate two law, and to tell you how the reason the Torah repeats itself is to tell you how bad this thing is, a very bad thing. The Torah enforced it with two law. The Mishnah says, "Vayisvu hashotrim l'daber al ha'am v'gomer." They the shotrim, the officers, the generals, continue talking to them, not the kohen mishal malchama, and they say anyone who's yari v'rach lev, anyone who's fearful and is faint of heart should go back. Rabbi Akiva Omer, what does that mean? Hayari v'rach lev kamashmo shena yachol la'am b'kisha malchama. If he goes into battle, he's going to be very afraid, seeing people dying. Liros cherev shlufa, even to see a sword that's drawn, he'll be very afraid. He has nothing to do with being afraid of the war. It's someone who's afraid he's going to die because he sinned. The Torah is called Elu Shiachzer. It's a very interesting thing. The reason all these other people go back, meaning the people who got married and the people who built a vineyard, who built a house and a vineyard, is not because, like I already said yesterday in Ben Sion, is because of the simcha. The Torah didn't want you to detract from the height of your enjoyment. The reason is because to cover up for the person who's going back because he's fearful. They'll say, oh, he's going back because he built a new house or he just got married, and that's why people won't realize that he sins, to protect him. Rabbi Yossi has a third opinion. Basically, it's similar to what Rabbi Yossi says. He says, if you violate, we'll see in the Gemara what the difference between these two opinions. If you're married, a Kohen married a Grusha, or a Kohen Gadol married an Almana, or you're married to Mamzeres, that's again the Yari V'Achlev. If you're afraid of this Avera that you did, so you go back. When they finish talking, so then they appoint officers, right? Lieutenants, I don't know, to in charge of the army in a more personal way. The Rosh Ha'am, so the Gemara says they put him at the head, right, to lead them in war. Ovakeva Shalom, and the Mishnah continues at the back of the army. Mamidin Zkifin Lifneihem, V'Achareim, V'Acherim Achareim. So they would put basically people in front of the army, meaning that people that fall in battle, they should be able to help them get off the field, the battlefield. And they put other people behind them. And they had axes, iron axes in their hands. They would prevent people from running away. If the people tried away, they had the permission to basically knock off the guy's legs. So you shouldn't run away. What's the reason? Top of Memdal Amid base. The beginning of running away is nefila. By people running back from the war, it's gonna scare the whole army, and everyone, they're gonna fall and they're gonna lose the war. Shenemar Nas Yisrael Lifnei Plishtim V'Gam Magef Agdola Haisa Ba'am. This is the time of Eli Akohen. They lost the Plishtim, they ran away, and then the Magefa, they were completely felled. The army was felled. Well, Omer, also when Shaul lost the Plishtim, I knew so Anshe Yisrael Lifnei Plishtim V'Yipru Chalal. They ran away, and what happened next? There were a lot of corpses. People died. The Mishnah says, Medra Amurim. Where do we have these exemptions, right? If you build a new house, you marry a new woman, you plant a vineyard. Where are these exemptions? Melchamos harashus, melchamos that are options. You don't have to do the war is an option. We'll see it. We'll clarify what that means in a second. Melchamas mitzvah, a melchama that's a mitzvah, kol yotzin. Everyone has to go. There's no exemption. Afilu chasim mechedra. You just got married. Mekala michupasa. A woman just got married. Now the question, the Mefarshim asks, the commentaries ask, what do you mean a woman? Women don't go to war. So one answer is, yes, they do go to war. In the Israeli army, women are in the war. That's one answer to the question. No one's going to say that, but that's the truth. And the other answer is like Sheirut Leumi, they do here, where they help out the war effort by, like we mentioned before, providing food, making sure there's food and the roads are smooth and the ammunition. So that's what they're going to be doing. But you see, clearly, women do help in the war effort. So therefore, there's a reason that they talk about Parsha Zachar. The Minchas Chinuch, the Sefer HaChinuch says, I think the Sefer HaChinuch says that women are not obligated in Parsha Zachar, because Parsha Zachar talks about remembering the war that you can do against Amalek, and women don't go out to war. The Gemara actually says it in various places that women they're not derech lichvosh. It's not their way to capture. Doesn't mean it's not the way to go out to war. But you see from here, they do have a portion in the war, whether they actually fight or they actually are part of the supplies. But they are Parsha of the war, and that's why the minute a lot of women, is to hear Parsha Zachar. Makes sense from this Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda argues on the Tanakh. Medra Amurim and Mechames mitzvah. When do these exemptions apply? In a Mechama that's called a mitzvah. Al Mechama is chova, a Mechama which is an obligation. I'll call you also in a field of chasam mechadra v'kalam mechopasa. Even if you just got married, you go out to war. We'll explain in the Gemara what's Machlokes Tanakh and Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says, "My ika ben Rabbi Yossi Aglili." Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi Aglili basically say the same thing. It means someone who did an avera. What's the difference between the two? Ika beinayu avera derabanan. If you only did a sin which is derabanan, and you're afraid that that's going to cause you punishment, you'll die in the war. Come on, azla had the Tanya sach ben tefillah avera hi biyada v'chozer aleh marcha v'cham. The Bryce says when you're putting on your tefillin, if you talk between the shal yad and the shal rosh, right, and you don't make another bracha on the shal rosh, so that's an avera. First of all, you did a hefsek. It's a bracha levatala, and you didn't make another bracha, which are presumably yisurim derabana. Kiman that's like Rabbi Yossi Galili says that even in avera derabana you go back for the war. Mantana la'ad tana rabbanan shama kol kronos v'hertia hagafas trisin v'hertia sichsuach haravos ma'im shosin lo berkav chozer. The Brisa says if you hear horns in the battlefield, or you hear that the shields are clasping against each other, or people are screaming, and you see drawn swords, and because of all of that, you urinate out of fear. Chozer. On account of that, you go back. Come on, Lema Rabbi Akiva. He says it's Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Right? Rabbi Akiva is the one who says you go back because, like, literally, the pasuk means what is little. Yari Rach Leo. You're afraid of the war. Yossi Aglili says because the averas. So the Gemara says Moda. Rabbi Yossi. I feel Rabbi Yossi Aglili Moda. Baha. I feel Rabbi Yossi Aglili Moda. Mishum Nechsiv Liyamas Ed Lavav Echav Klavo. When Rabbi Yossi Aglili said in the Mishnah, Yari Rach Leva means that people are afraid of averos. They go back. He didn't come to exclude from the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. He just had to add on, right? Because it says, the pasuk adds on, he shouldn't melt the hearts of his brothers. Like we said, if some people leave, everyone's going to be afraid. So therefore, that comes to include people who are actually afraid of the war. They also go back. Hi, the Gemara says, because tchilas nisa nefila. The Gemara says, tchilas nisa because the beginning of running away is falling down. Doesn't really make sense. The beginning of running away is falling down. Just because you run away doesn't mean you're going to fall down. When it says the beginning of losing the war is when you run away. Running away is going to cause you to lose the war. That's what it should say. So the Gemara says change around the words of the Mishnah because people the beginning of the downfall is by people running away. The Medvar Amura, the Mishnah continues. Melchames harashos. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rashos Rabban is really mitzvah Rabbi Yehuda. Mitzvah the Rabban is Zui Chova the Rabbi Yehuda. Really, they don't argue, right? They're basically saying the same thing. They just call it different things, right? The Rashus of the Rabbanan is basically the same thing as a mitzvah of Rabbi Yehuda, and the mitzvah of the Rabbanan is the same thing as Chova the Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara clarifies: I'm a Rabbi Yehuda, I'm a Rava. Melchames Yoshua l'chabesh devra kol Chova. Everyone agrees that when they conquered Eretz Yisrael, they had to go in and conquer Israel. It's a mitzvah to conquer Eretz Yisrael. Everyone agrees that's a chova, and everyone goes to fight. There's no exemptions. Melchames based David l'Ravcha in the time of David when he was king, and they had control, and they just wanted to add on land, right? They started the war just to add on land to Eretz Yisrael. Everyone agrees that's a rishos, and the exemptions apply. Ki pligi l'meute ovdei kochavim d'l'layis. Like what's going on right now, that when Israel has its own land and non-Jewish people are trying to attack them, they shouldn't, to protect themselves. Mar kari le mitzvah, mar kari rishos. Right? It's just a machlokas how you term the terminology. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that's called a mitzvah. According to the Banan, it's called a rishos. But the exclusions apply in this type of war. The exclusions apply, right? If you're someone who built, you don't have to go fight. If you're someone who just got married, or you built a new house or a new vineyard. So what's the difference in calling it a mitzvah and calling it a rishos? Nafkamina, the osek mitzvah is required to a mitzvah. So, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he calls it a mitzvah. So therefore, when you're fighting the war, you're called doing a mitzvah. Fighting a war is a mitzvah according to Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, you're exempt from other mitzvahs like Kriya Shema and Tefillin and things like that. According to the Rabbanan, who presumably paskin, like you're doing a rishos, you're doing something which is discretionary. You have to do it, right, to protect Eretz Yisrael, but you're not called doing a mitzvah. You're just doing. It's not a mitzvah necessarily, and therefore you're chayiv in the mitzvahs. Chayiv and Kriya Shema, etc. Hadralach Mashal Machama. We have now finished the 8th parak. Let's move on to the 9th parak. Egla Rufa, decapitated calf. Lashon HaKodesh. It's supposed to be done. The psukim that they say in Lashon HaKodesh, decapitated calf, just to review, is basically between two cities you find someone who was murdered. You don't know who murdered him, which city is responsible. So you measure whichever city is closer, and that city has to bring, they're considered liable, and to atone for that, they have to bring a calf to a valley which doesn't grow any plants, and they have to decapitate it from the behind and say certain psukim and wash their hands. The psukim they say are in Lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew exclusively. They can't be said in language. In Emar, ki matzeh chol ba'adam b'yitzuz genecha v'shavtecha shlosha mibeis in Agodah Yerushalayim. Sorry. Because the pasuk says, now it's not clear from this pasuk why it has to be in Hebrew. The Gemara will explain where you know it from Hebrew. So the Mishnah continues, shlosha mibeis in Agodah Yerushalayim yotzin. It wasn't just any people that came. 3 of the judges from the 71 judges in Sanhedrin Agadol came to the city, and they were the ones. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chamisha. Rabbi Yehuda said there's 5 of them. Shenemar Zikenecha Shnayim. Zikenecha, right? The minimum plural is 2. V'Shovtecha Shnayim, another 2. They ain't based in shakel. You can't have an even based in. Mosif Alein Orecha. You have to have 5. Nimsa Talmud. Let's say that the person between the 2 cities is found buried. Begal, buried under rubble or stones. Otali be'ilan, or he's hanging from a tree. Osaf al pnei mayim, or he drowned in the water. He's floating in the water. Lo, you orphan. They would not do egla rufa. Shnemar ba'adama. It says by egla rufa in the ground. V'lo tamun begal. If he's covered in rubble, he's not found on the ground. No fell. That he fell. V'lo tali be'ilan. He has to be on the ground, not hanging from a tree. B'sada in the field. V'lo saf al pnei mayim. That comes to exclude if he's drowned, if he's floating on the water. Nimsa samach l'sapar. Let's say the city that he was found between, whether it was the border between Eretz Israel, the city, and the border of Eretz Israel. There's no other city. Or he's closer to a city where most of the people are non-Jews. Or it was next to a city where there's no basin. It's not a basin of 23. 23 Dayanim were in certain cities. Lo, you orphan. They would not do Egla Aruf. Ein modin el sheish ba basin. Like we said, we only measure when the 2 cities that were around him were both have a Sanhedrin Gedola, not the Sanhedrin of 71, the Sanhedrin of 23, which could impose death penalty. The Gemara says, in my Kamar, what's the proof from the Mishnah that it was in Hebrew? It says in the Parsha of Eglah Va'anu, they speak up. When it comes to the brachos and kolos, the har grizim and har evil, we learned earlier, it says, they spoke up. And we learned earlier that har grizim and har evil was exclusive in Hebrew. Xera Shavrim somewhere else. So here also, we learn from Anu, it's in Hebrew. Just like har grizim and har evil was in Hebrew, here also in Hebrew. Say there, Egla Rufa. So basically what the Gemara is saying is that when the Gemara says, Shenemar is not teaching you its Hebrew. It's really the next part of the Mishnah to tell you what happens, what's the procedure of Egla Rufa. Well, that's what it says. Say there Egla Rufa, Ketza. How do you do it? And the Mishnah explains, the first opinion is that 3 judges from the Hezron go. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chamish, Rabbi Yehuda says 5. Zagenecha Shnayim, Shavtecha Shnayim, maybe it's in Shakel, mostly of Leino Orecha. And Reikin Chamisha, did Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, like in the Mishnah, he says minimum Zikanim is 2, minimum Shoftim is 2, so you have to have an odd number, so 5. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Shimon, who's the Tana Kamar, Mishnah says Zagenecha Shnayim. Zagenecha means 2, maybe it's in Shakel, mostly of Leino Orecha. So therefore, you can't have an odd number, so you have 3. Harekan Shlosha, you have 3. Rabbi Shimon Nami Yaksiv Shavtecha. What does he do with the word Shavtecha? The reason the Torah would Shavtecha is to teach you that it's not just any judges, the special judges, the ones from Sanhedrin have to come. Rehuda learned that. It could have said Zikne, right? Why does it say Zikinecha? Your judges, the most special ones from the Sanhedrin. Rabbi Shimon, Ikas Rachman is Zikne, or Shimon doesn't learn from there. It would have said Zikne. How about me? I feel Zikne Ashuk. I would have thought even regular people, old people in the marketplace who don't have knowledge about halacha. Kasher is Genecha. Therefore, it says Genecha. People who are knowledgeable will be Dayanim. Because Rabbi is Genecha, it says Genecha, Mina Filos and Hezrek Tana. Even someone from a basin of 23. Kasher Shavtecha, and Yichadin Shavtecha. Teacher, it has to be Dayanim from the Sanhedrin, Agdola, 71. Rabbi Yehuda, who says, nah, Gemara Zikne. He has to learn Zikne, Zera Shava, Bizikne Aida, when it comes to if the Sanhedrin err and they give a ruling that Rov of Klal Yisrael violates something which, if you do it b'shogeg you're chayav chatas, b'meiz you're chayav kares. They have to bring a korban, and therefore it says ziknei ha'ida. Malahal miyuchadin shve'ida. There it's clear that it has to be from the Sanhedrin. Afkam miyuchadin shve'ida. So therefore that's where he learns that it's the special one. So he can use shoftecha to teach me another two judges. Over there, it's not clear where, but over there it seems to be that it's five judges. So let's learn the whole thing. 5 judges here. Why do you need shoftecha? Mahasam. Zekenecha shoftecha lamali. So the Gemara he retreats. Really, he doesn't have the Gzera Shava. Vav v'shoftecha l'minyana. You're right. Shoftecha, he agrees with Rabbi Shimon, teaches you the special ones from the Sanhedrin. But why the extra vav? That comes to teach you that you add another 2 judges, l'minyana. Rabbi Shimon, who says only 3, what does he do with the vav? The top of Mem Hey Amid Aleph. Vav lo mashmaleh. He doesn't darshan a vav. Sometimes we darshan a vav, sometimes we don't darshan. It's machlokas whether a vav, an extra vav, is worthy of darshaning or not. And therefore, he only ends up with 3, not 5. That's the conclusion of today's share. Stay tuned for Ian with Ben Sion, where I talk about a lesson about the right age to get married. The prevalent minhag is to get married at a much younger age nowadays. I'll talk more about that. Ian with Ben Sion coming up next.